24. The Way Home. This is a nightmare. Wake up. The room around Knox came into focus. Too clear, too detailed to be a dream. The awareness stole the air from his lungs all over again. Maven bustled around the large, open kitchen. This space had always felt like home. The smell of baking bread mixed with the savory scent of a thin broth soup on the stove. Even as a boy, he and Taryn had been welcomed here and treated as family. The warmth and security of this place was no small part of why he wanted a family of his own. Taryn didn't. He'd wanted the life of an overseer. Never once had he expressed any desire for a different sort of future, a family. Did he lie? Knox cleared his throat, and Maven paused, stirring the soup on the stove. What happened that day? A sad half-smile moved her mouth. I was going to wait for Ship and Dayton to get here, but it's probably better to talk it through on our own first. Dayton is here? He is, but that's another story that's best for him to tell. Knox fell silent for a moment. Maven sighed, and she laid down the spoon and turned. The Earthbound retreated, and you were gone. She moved to the long wooden table and sat across from him. We thought you died in the most horrific way. Emilia was inconsolable. Taryn, too. She shuddered at the memory. Everyone was in shock. Emilia was on a transport back to the cluster when her pains started. Maven swallowed hard and took a moment to collect herself. I tried everything I knew of to stall and stop her labor, but it was not to be. We lost the child the next day. Her voice wobbled in uncharacteristic uncertainty. Knox coughed, trying to clear the lump lodged in his throat as he swiped back unchecked tears. The two sat in silence, each in their own thoughts. Eventually, with a steadier voice, Maven continued. She fought hard, you know. She was desperate to save the child, and when the child was gone, Maven shrugged helplessly. The grief was too heavy. She needed someone to blame. The Order, he said. The Order, she agreed. I tried to remind her it was your choice. I even alluded to my own choice, but it backfired. Knox's eyes snapped up to Maven's, voice dropping to a low whisper. You didn't. Maven held up her hands defensively. I was trying to reassure her that it's possible to lay down one's power and not be dogged by regret. She pieced it together, and I didn't correct her. In retrospect, I should have. Knox pulled out Emilia's letter from his pocket and clutched it. That's why she included you in here. Maven dipped her head. Yes. You should have stopped her. I wasn't nearly careful enough. If the Order discovers how much she knows, they will silence her. Maven's expression pinched. I would have. She snuck off in the night and joined Taryn. I believe he did what he did to protect her. Knox snorted and dropped his head into his hands, fingers tangling into his hair. The thought of Taryn with Emilia made his mind go blank. A rush of strength coursed into his limbs, and he forced his breath to slow. Maven sensed his slipping control and spoke gently. Taryn was as lost as Emilia at your disappearance. He felt responsible. That much was clear. I imagine his only thought is to make things right. Knox stiffened at the words. So he traded vows with her? Of all the stone-headed things to do? He slammed his fist onto the table. The heavy structure shuddered, and a loud crack sounded. Sobered, he looked at the split in the thick timber before him, and his face dropped. Maven, I'm sorry. She waved a hand in the air absently. Gord will fix it. She reached forward and rested her hands over his clenched fists. We don't know who initiated it. The only thing that makes any sense is the why. Who initiated it? The thought of Amelia approaching Taryn instead of the other way around tore a fresh wound into his gut, and he pushed back from the table, feeling suddenly sick. She wouldn't do that. Maven's face creased in worry. They both love you, and neither are thinking clearly right now. They think you are dead, Nox. If Taryn was set on protecting Amelia, why bring her to the capital? His voice strained as he tried desperately to keep his emotions in check. Heat boiled in his palms, begging to be released. It doesn't make sense. Amelia wouldn't be left behind, and from what Dedan has told us, it was a good thing they came when they did. Jai may not have made it home if they hadn't intervened. Nox pulled in a long, slow breath and for a moment remembered his friend. The day Amelia had fallen from the rock bluff as children, Taryn had carried so much guilt. Nox had assumed it was platonic. Did he love her even then? The sting of betrayal soured his stomach, and a sudden fatigue pulled at him. They're in the capital? Maven nodded. Communications are still down, but they should arrive any day. He pushed himself up and moved toward the door. I need to go. He let the waves of energy pulsing through his veins push down the grief threatening to overwhelm him. Nox, wait. He reluctantly stopped and turned. The worry lines around her eyes made him flinch. Where are you going? He scowled at the question. Where do you think? I'm going to get my wife back. And teach Taryn a lesson he won't soon forget. Maven paled, even as she kept her eyes locked on his. The door burst open, and Gord strode in. Well, Dedan and Ship were as surprised as we were, but are relieved to hear you are alive and well. He stopped, taking note of the tension in the room. His eyes flicked to the table and grimaced. Ah, you got to the heart of things, then. Maven slowly stood and gave him a meaningful look. Gord shifted back, blocking the door. You could say that, Nox said, and moved to step past him. Gord grabbed his arm in a firm grip. Nox tried to pull away, but he held fast. Amelia is not the only one we care about in all of this. Nox huffed. I'll try not to kill him, but no promises. Gord's grip didn't loosen, and Nox shifted his weight in a show of resignation before meeting his father-in-law's eye. The weariness he had noticed before was back in full force, tinged with the weight of half-hidden sorrow. This family has lost enough for a lifetime. His broad jaw twitched with emotion. And I don't have it in me to lose you again. Me? Gord's care brought another cloud of emotion pressing forward. He flared his strength, letting the thrumming pulse override his desire to crumple to the floor. You won't. Nox pulled from Gord's grip and strode out the door. He broke into a run and didn't slow until he could see his and Amelia's house in the gathering dark, quiet under the young maples. Light escaped from neighboring windows and savory-smelling smoke filled the air, but thankfully no one stopped Nox as he jumped over the railing onto their stilted deck. He'd grab a few supplies and some fresh clothes before Logan made it into the cluster. Then he'd take the transport and leave before he had to face anyone else. Logan could fill them in on what was coming. And Kip? Logan could watch out for her, too. Guilt pressed in on his chest at the thought of leaving the child, and with an angry burst he shoved the half-opened door wide. He flipped on a bank of lights beneath the kitchen shelves. Silence assailed him, along with the details he'd missed when he first rushed in looking for Amelia this afternoon. Everything lay in perfect order within the modest space. The smell of cold hearth mixed with the citrus scent of freshly scrubbed surfaces sent a shudder of pain through his chest at its familiarity. Nox let his hand drift across the counter, memories of their life peppering him. How could she swear herself to Taryn? Feeling the fool, he looked around the dim room. Was any of this real? The living room sat filled with soft knit blankets draped over chairs and over stuffed pillows tucked into corners. Thick curtains hung lifeless, mocking him with promised comfort that was no longer here. Emilia had been his warmth. She was her own fire, and together they had burned brightly. Or so he thought. And now? What was he to think? Moments after he'd been taken, she'd swept from this place, taking all the warmth with her. A small, logical part of his mind could begrudgingly acknowledge Maven's argument that it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was all grief and good intentions, but such thoughts felt like a desperate, foolish sort of hope. He sagged and leaned back against the countertop, the air suddenly thin as he fought to pull in a breath. Artificial light glinted off a row of glasses neatly perched on their shelf, in contrast to the deep shadows of the room. He and Terran had shared a drink that morning, toasting Emilia. Here's to the forces that bind us and make us their own, Terran had answered. The earlier heat reignited. Terran understood the power of vows and how an oath would supernaturally work on a person. Did Emilia? Would she know she would be drawn to Terran? His stomach churned at the thought. Would she now look at Terran like she had once looked at him? A flush of heat raced through his arms, and he reached for a glass, hurling it across the room. It hit the stone mantel and shattered. The sharp notes echoed the cry of his own heart. He grabbed another, letting power rush through his limbs and cloud over the pain. Shards of glass littered the floor, and he relished in the clean feeling of anger. He sailed another cup across the room. Too soon the shelf cleared, and the floor glinted, grief again crowding close. Nox shrank back from the powerless feeling and let the anger burn. I sacrificed everything for nothing. He let out a feral roar and flipped the table. Chairs skittered back and toppled. Even as a corner of his mind protested for control, he snatched a chair and smashed it into the floor. Splinters of wood scattered, leaving him with a blunt, rounded leg in his hand. It was a poor substitute for the club he had left with Logan, but it would do. He snorted at the thought as he swept his makeshift club through a side table, sending a lamp to join the broken glass in the living room. He shouldn't need a weapon here. This was his home. He moved through the room like a storm, giving himself over to the inferno roiling within. The scattered pieces of the living space did nothing to numb the pain. He moved into the bedroom with a vengeful fury, spilling shelves and dismantling the space he and Emilia had shared. As if his mind knew its limits, he could not consider the full implications of Emilia and Terran binding themselves together. If he did, upon this ground he would shatter. Instead, he growled in frustration, flinging the mattress into the wall with a backhanded motion, and stalked back into the living room. One door remained. He kicked it with such force the door tore from its hinges, sending wooden shrapnel flying into the cribbed bed against the far wall. His breath came in heavy gulps as he stared at the shattered wood and disturbed room, and the fire within him sputtered out. This room was meant for them. His lost child. Shame flooded through him. This is ever my oath before the sky. To intercede, to protect, to preserve, to fight. For his people. His strength was meant to protect, not destroy. He swallowed and took a shaky breath as he lifted a section of door off of the small bed. He let it fall to the floor as his vision blurred with unspilled tears and rested his hand on the neatly tucked blanket. His child was meant to lay here, and instead broken pieces of their home filled their space. Because of him. He never let himself believe Emilia had been lost along with their child. It was a wound he'd been unwilling to bear, but this loss, one where she had bound herself to another man, proved more devastating. He stared at the torn-up space. If I become this, a force of destruction, he wouldn't survive such a self-inflicted wound to his soul. To do so would be to prove himself unworthy of his role as overseer, or his hope of being a father. If all else was torn from him, he could not betray himself in this way. He dropped his head to the rail and let silent tears come. For his child he would never meet. For Amelia, for himself. A ravenous void raked through him, but the tears, unlike the anger that burned away both sorrow and reason, instead doused the flames, leaving him a burnt-out shell. He slumped to the floor and pressed his hand through the rails of the crib to clutch the fabric within. All else fell away but the feel of the cotton under his fingertips, and he let himself unravel in great, heaving sobs. A small hand rested on his shoulder, and he started. Kip stood behind him with a concerned look. As if waking from a dark dream, Knox pulled in a clearing breath, rubbing a hand across his forehead, trying to marshal his thoughts. When had she come in? Kip reached a hand to his cheek, her round palm warm against his skin, and with solemnity one of her age should not possess, held his gaze. She's reassuring me? He wiped at a stray tear and gave her a tight smile. She dropped her hand and leaned into his side. He scooped the girl into his arms as he stood. He would not forget his promise again. "Kip?" Logan called from the other room, more lights flickering on and illuminating the destruction. "Stay close. I don't know." His voice cut off as he caught sight of the two of them. He stepped into the doorway, casting a sideways glance at a piece of wood still hanging from one hinge. "Maven mentioned you might be here." He let the words trail off, clearly at a loss of what else to say. "We waited a while, but we're worried." "I'm okay," he said, his voice still gravelly. Logan eyed him warily. "I promise. I'll be all right." Logan cleared the door to let them pass and made a show of looking around the destroyed living room. "This would be evidence to the contrary, I wager." Knox took in the damage. The only chair that remained upright was the rocking chair Gord had made. Fresh tears threatened at the sight. "I have no doubt you'd get good odds on that bet." The choice still remained. He could go chasing after Amelia and Taryn, or he could trust, as Maven had said, they were each doing the best they could. And my best? His best needed to be better. If Amelia and Taryn were trying to bring help back to Rickon, the least he could do was ensure it was still here when they returned. He glanced at Kip. He could protect those under his care and start putting their needs before his own. He and Amelia would have to sort out the rest of this mess after Rickon was looked after. Knox picked his way back to the front door and met Logan's eye. "I had some thinking to do, but for what it's worth, I made a decision." Logan grunted. "I'd say that's worth a fair amount. What did you decide? Are you staying?" He paused, looking suddenly awkward. "You know?" Knox asked. Logan shuffled and kept his eyes on the floor. "I hurt. I'm sorry." Knox swallowed back the sour feelings. "One crisis at a time, I suppose." "Are you leaving?" "No. We've got to get the cluster prepared for what's coming. Amelia will have to find her own way home."